3, Scene 1 begins an undetermined amount of time after Macbeth has become king, but he has already been crowned. And so it has been maybe about a month since he became king. And Banquo is now at the royal palace. You see that the Macbeths are now living at Forest, the royal palace. They are not at their castle, which is called Inverness. And so Banquo is there visiting, and it begins, the scene 1 here begins with a very short soliloquy by Banquo, all alone on stage. And he begins by saying, "Thou hast it now, King Cawdor Glams, all as the weird women promised, and I fear thou playedst most foully for it." So if you've already watched the video about Banquo, you know that he's beginning to be suspicious of Macbeth, and he is thinking about the weird women and what they promised and what that might mean Macbeth has done to get the crown. But then Lady Macbeth and Macbeth enter with a trumpet fanfare now that they are king and queen. And Macbeth talks to Banquo about, he says, a solemn supper, which solemn means serious. So they are having a very important feast, and they want Banquo to be there for it. Let's listen.
Thou hast it now, King Cawdor Glams, all as the weird women promised. And I fear thou playedst most foully for it. Yet it was said it should not stand in thy posterity, but that myself should be the root and father of many kings. If there come truth from them, as upon thee, Macbeth, their speeches shine, why, by the verities on thee made good, may they not be my oracles as well, and set me up in hope? But hush, no more.
Here's our chief guest.
If he had been forgotten, it had been as a gap in our great feast, and awfully unbecoming.
Tonight we hold a solemn supper, sir, and I'll request your presence.
Let your highness command upon me, to the which my duties are with a most indissoluble tie forever knit.
Ride you this afternoon?
Aye, my good lord.
We should have else desired your good advice, which still hath been both grave and prosperous in this day's council. But we'll take tomorrow. Is't far you ride?
As far, my lord, as will fill up the time twixt this and supper. Go not my horse the better, I must become a borrower of the night for a dark hour or twain.
Fail not our feast.
My lord, I will not.
We hear our bloody cousins are bestowed in England and in Ireland, not confessing their cruel parasite, filling the hearers with strange invention. But of that tomorrow, when therewithal we shall have cause of state craving us jointly. Are you to horse? Adieu, till you return at night. Goes Fleance with you?
Aye, my good lord. Our time does call upon us.
I wish your horses swift and sure of foot, and so I do commend you to their backs. Farewell. Let every man be master of his time till 7 at night. To make society the sweeter welcome, we will keep ourselves till supper time alone. While then, God be with you.
My lord.
Sirrah, a word with you. Attend those men our pleasure.
They are, my lord, without the palace gate.
Bring them before us.
So now Macbeth is alone on stage, and he is going to launch into a long, important soliloquy that we will pay careful attention to. First, I just want to mention a couple of things that Macbeth says to Banquo here. He says, we hear our bloody cousins are bestowed in England and Ireland, talking, of course, about Malcolm and Donalbain. And he says that they are not confessing their cruel parricide, but filling their hearers with strange invention. So he claims, of course, that Malcolm and Donalbain are telling lies to anyone who will listen, but we, of course, can suspect that they are telling the truth and, saying our father was murdered and we might be next. So now that Macbeth is alone, he begins with the line that we looked over in Bellwork: to be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. To be king is nothing if I'm not securely the king. And then he begins to talk about some of the worries he has about Banquo. So we will listen first and then go through this carefully.
To be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. Our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royalty of nature reigns that which would be feared. 'Tis much he dares, and to that dauntless temper of his mind he hath a wisdom that doth guide his valour to act in safety. There is none but he whose being I do fear, and under him my genius is rebuked. As it is said, Mark Antony's was by Caesar. He chid the sisters when first they put the name of king upon me, and bade them speak to him. Then, prophet-like, they hailed him father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown, and put a barren sceptre in my gripe, thence to be wrenched with an unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. If it be so, for Banquo's issue have I filed my mind. For them the gracious Duncan have I murdered, put rancors in the vessel of my peace only for them, and mine eternal jewel given to the common enemy of man to make them kings, the seeds of Banquo kings. Rather than so, come, fate, into the list, and champion me to the utterance.
All right. So we are going to take this apart rather carefully. So I want to have this right here nearby. To be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. Our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royalty of nature. There's a double meaning in this word. Royalty means a couple of different things. First of all, his nature is royal because his kids will be king. But also, he has a stature, or he has a personality that is royal, meaning that he's above others by nature. And so maybe lofty nature would also go there. 'Tis much he dares, and to that dauntless temper of his mind. So they gloss the word dauntless for you, that he is fearless, and he has a wisdom that doth guide his valor to act in safety. This is a complicated phrase that, if you pause and look these up. So he has wisdom, meaning that he is intelligent, and his valor means courage, and to act in safety means to do what's right or what's best. And so he's saying Banquo is smart enough and brave enough to do what's right, even if it would go against me, which is something we talked about with Banquo, that he is more concerned about his character than he is about his loyalty to Macbeth. So he's saying he is smart enough and brave enough to do the right thing. And so he says he's the only one I'm worried about. And under him, his genius is rebuked, meaning that standing next to Banquo, I don't look so good. For example, Banquo scolded the sisters when they put the name of king upon me and bade them speak to him. Now, that's not exactly how it went down, if you'll remember. Macbeth got really quiet, and Macbeth wasn't talking to the witches. But now he's turning it around and making it seem like Banquo was being bossy or trying to be in charge of the witches. And then he's going through the things we already know. Prophet like they hailed him a father to a line of kings. Upon my head, he says, they placed a fruitless crown. We have several important symbols here. A fruitless crown, a barren scepter in my grip, fence to be wrenched with an unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. So all of those symbols go to mean the same thing there. He uses all of those, the fruitless crown, the barren scepter, and the unlineal hand, all mean that his kids will not be kings. And so that's why it's fruitless and barren, the crown and the scepter being symbols of kingship. And so then he starts to get angry. You can hear it in his tone. If it be so, he says, and this is where it kind of starts to turn, for Banquo's issue have I defiled my mind, have I befouled my mind. For them, the gracious Duncan, have I murdered. Put rancors in the vessel of my peace, for only for them. We've got some important symbols here. And mine eternal jewel, given to the common enemy of man to make them kings. So over and over again, now he is turning his attention toward Banquo's children. And he says, so if my kids aren't going to inherit this, and Banquo's kids are, then I did this all for them. I killed Duncan for them. And then he says he put ill feelings in the vessel of his peace. He's talking about his mind here. So he says, I filled my mind with these terrible thoughts for them. He says, I have given my eternal jewel, which means his soul, his eternal soul, to the common enemy of man, who is the enemy of all men, Satan, the devil. So basically what he's saying here, he says, I have sold my soul to the devil for them, to make them kings, the seed of Banquo kings. He uses these terms for Banquo's kids. He calls them his issue, his seed, making them seem not human. And then he makes a declaration because he realizes he doesn't want it to be that way. He doesn't want to have sold his soul and his mind to Satan. He doesn't want to go to hell for Banquo's kids. So he says, rather than so, come fate into the list and champion me to the utterance. Here he is challenging fate. So when he says, come fate into the list, he calls fate into the rink, like a boxing ring. Or it says a jousting field. So calls fate into the ring and says he will fight it. He says, I will fight against this fate. Even though the witches said that Banquo's kids are going to be kings, I'm ready to fight that because I'm not willing to let that happen. That is where this soliloquy ends. And now, the attendant comes back and brings 2 murderers in to talk to Macbeth. And that is on a separate video. Well, I'm going to go ahead and do it here. Never mind. I will just summarize here that he talks to the murderers about killing Banquo. That is the plan here. He has just gone through all these reasons why he wants not just Banquo, but remember he asked Banquo if Fleance was going with him? And he doesn't want to let Banquo's kids inherit. So he is hiring these murderers to kill Banquo and Fleance and put him out of his misery and bring back the vessel of his peace. He ends with this great couplet. It is concluded, Banquo, thy soul's flight, if it find heaven, must find it out tonight. And that casts back to the couplet at the end of Act 2, Scene 1, at the end of the Is This a Dagger speech, where he says, hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. So some parallels here between Act 2, Scene 1 and Act 3, Scene 1.